we're gonna start with Cristi. He's our next speaker, and he's a passionate web developer and co-founder of Binary Code, a photography enthusiast and a nature lover who is always trying to find simplicity everywhere. Oh, that sounds so beautiful. Hi, Cristi.
Hi, hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Um,
meet you too.
Thank you. So in your talk, you're going to give us some insights of how to grow a prototype into a ready feature in a fast and stable way with Vue.js and Tailwind, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Nice. And they're also going to share some highlights of the combined frameworks and how they can improve development productivity and focus on the core features of an application than some other third-party libraries and stuff. So
Yep, for sure. We're
as a
going to
developer,
look.
I like the idea of the focus.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
If you're ready,
Uh,
I'll leave you the stage. And people, welcome to the talk, Rapid Development with Vue.js and Tailwind.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi everyone. I'm very glad to be here and to give this talk. This is a new experience for me. Previously didn't give talks to larger audiences, so this is something interesting and fun. So today we're going to talk about rapid development with Vue.js and Tailwind. Um, Actually, I assume many of you already are familiar with Vue.js, but not necessarily with Tailwind. So I think it will be best to show an animation from the official Tailwind documentation of what actually Tailwind is. And as you can see here, it's pretty much a CSS library, but it's a utility-based CSS library, which allows us to write CSS with different utility classes, such as background, paddings, width, heights, text sizes, and so on. And by doing this, it allows us to compose nice utility classes to achieve some cool results. So yeah, this is what Tailwind is in essence. And I think when combining it with Vue.js, you get a very sweet combo, and you get really productive with it. So actually, there are some interesting similarities between Vue.js and Tailwind, and especially the fact that they have wonderful growth so far. And even Tailwind has a greater like curve growth so far. Like 2 years ago, it started from a couple of thousands of downloads, and now it has around 1.6 million downloads per month. It's being slowly adopted more and more by a lot of developers and a lot of companies, and it's from my experience, it's proven to be very consistent and reliable. All right, so let's start and see where this combination is a good fit from my point of view. It's a great fit for new projects, of course, but this is debatable because, like most of technologies, you'd think that are a great fit for new projects. But the second option, which from my experience, Tailwind proves to be a great fit for long-term maintenance, because it gives you a consistent set of utility classes, and along the way, as time passes by, it just gives you consistency and a easier way to maintain the styling part of the projects. And then it's also a wonderful fit for rapid development cycles. For example, if you want to build a small prototype or an MVP and then further extend it to something bigger, it's wonderful for that as well. And the last fit I would say is also for component libraries. If you have to build some component libraries to use across different projects, it's also a nice fit because, again, it helps with the maintenance part and allows for new developers to get in quite easily. Yeah, so let's jump straight into an example. So here we have an example of a button component. It has different colors. It has like two different states, a solid and an outline state. It has different sizes and icon support and different shapes. And the amazing thing I would say is that this component is 35 lines of code for all this functionality. And yeah, that's pretty much it, the code for it. So let's see what exactly happens here. So we have some basic classes, like a bunch of classes from Tailwind CSS. At the first look, it might look like intimidating and strange, but believe me, once you get used to it, it's actually very straightforward, because you can see right away that, okay, this button has a shadow, has some border, it's centered. On hover, like the shadow increases and stuff like that. So you can see right away how it behaves in different scenarios. Then besides that, we have some conditional styles. For example, when we give it the round prop, it will put in the rounded full class, which will make the button rounded, like here. Then, for example, when the size is large, it will make the button large. When the size is medium, it will make it smaller, and so on. And here we have some dynamic classes for the different colors. In Tailwind, there are color classes for background, text color, border color, and so on. So even without too much knowledge about Tailwind, it's pretty intuitive to grasp some of these classes and get used to them pretty quickly. For example, P stands for padding, H stands for heights, border, background, and so on. So we get, with 35 lines of code, I would say, quite a lot of functionality. And next on, I have the same example of the same button, which has exactly the same styling, the same colors, and so on, which at the first look has a slightly cleaner template, has almost the same JavaScript part, but then it has like a ton of CSS code. And this is actually the minimum amount of CSS code you'd have to write for this button component. And as you can see, the same button component without Tailwind has 150 lines, and the previous one had 35 lines. So it's like more than 3 times the amount of lines of code. And in terms of actual code, it's 3 times more code. And for example, even if you strip down the colors from here, which define all the colors for the buttons, those are by default a part of Tailwind. Even if we strip down these and remove these, we still have 2 times more code, like 2 times more characters than in the previous example. And here you could already see some of the benefits of Tailwind, and the fact that it reduces like a lot of code when you deal with components with different states and so on, and when you deal with styling in general. So based on that, we can see some of the advantages and some of the advantages of both approaches. With Tailwind CSS, we have a more verbose template. At the first look, the template contains more stuff in it, contains all those CSS utilities. We have a bigger size, of course, because the library itself has some size because of all those utility classes within it. If we don't use some way to remove those unused classes. Tailwind actually has a built-in purge CSS option, which allows you to pretty much remove all the unused CSS. And it works pretty cool. All right. On the other side, we have the plain CSS approach. which has a cleaner template, but has way more custom CSS. Therefore, we have way more code and way more boilerplate. We have to write a lot more stuff to achieve the same result. So based on that, we can say that Tailwind has several benefits based on those two examples that we showed before. First of all, I would say it has far better consistency. It has wonderful built-in classes, which provides you consistency across the development cycle of the project. You can think of it like like a style guide, and you have that right from the start. And then we have less code, we have less boilerplate, and it's easier to delete unused CSS. Excuse me. So here we have another example, which is a drag and drop Kanban board. You can see it has some cool functionality. Okay, so let's jump into the code. For this, you'd think that it has quite a lot of CSS, but actually there is only a couple of lines of custom CSS. This is all the custom CSS for that example. And it has some layout stuff here. Excuse me. It has some layout options, some draggable component, and some task cards. The task card looks like this. It has some utilities like background, shadow, paddings, and borders and stuff like that. And it's pretty straightforward to read, even if you don't have a lot of Tailwind specific experience. Then we have these badges, which represent these colored badges below the avatar. And by looking at this, we can see that even for the badges, it takes like 20 lines of code to define these badges, which is, I would say, is very little code in order to achieve, like, to get out the component which has different colors and different states. All right, so along with Tailwind, there is a very interesting set of tools and ecosystem. The first one is Tailwind Ui, which is a set of components and examples built with the Tailwind CSS. It's a paid package, but it's just wonderful. It saves you a lot of time. So, for example, let's take this pricing sections. They're very well built with great design, and you have all the code built with Tailwind CSS right away. And you can use it to build prototypes, and not even prototypes, pretty much to achieve great results in very little time. All right. Then we have some extensions for IDEs, and one of them is an IntelliSense plugin for Visual Studio Code, which gives you these nice suggestions for all the utility classes, and it's very useful, especially when you're not very familiar with all the classes. Then we have some cool tutorials, which are built by the author of the Tailwind CSS, Adam Wadham. And it contains a great set of examples of how you can you can build different things with Tailwind CSS, and how you can use some of the features from Tailwind CSS. All right, and then the last one is a set of examples from Code Sandbox, which contains, which uses both Vue and Tailwind CSS, and there are a bunch of examples, including the one that I showed you previously. Okay. Before I mentioned that Tailwind has a great set of built-in utilities, and sometimes you can think of it like a style guide, and in essence, it's like that because it defines some very nice built-in classes for things like colors, font sizes, spacing, and so on. And these provide like great consistency across the development cycle of a project. All right, so I also prepared a pre-recorded demo of how you can build a side drawer or slide over component with Vue and Tailwind. I will speed it up a bit. So this also includes the setup of the actual library, which we are doing at this point in time. There are a few things we have to stop, like import the Tailwind CSS and then define a post CSS config. As you can see, we brought a pre-built button from the Tailwind CSS library with all the styling needed. Here, we set up the actual side drawer component, and we want to add Vue model support for it. And at this point, we define some props and add support for Vue model. Actually, this is built with Vue 3, and in Vue 3 there is a default model value prop, which allows you to define Vue model support. And here we define the toggle behavior and made sure the Vue model support works. At this point in time, we define pretty much the overlay of the side drawer, and you can think of it like an overlay for a model with a semi-transparent background, as you can see in the demo here. Then we define the actual content for the side drawer. We can specify through these utility classes things like width, max width, background, and so on. And as you can see here, we already have this side drawer from the right with basic styling and shadows and stuff like that. And after this point, we specify the behavior of when should it close, and it will pretty much close when clicking the overlay background. We also add support for things like animations through Vue Js Transitions. And with the help of Vue Js Transition Classes, as you'll see in a short moment, we can define the behavior of how it opens with transitions. So at this point, the side drawer works, but it doesn't really animate. So we add a couple of classes. And here we specify that it should translate from 100% to 0. These are some built-in classes from Tailwind, things like translate X, which is horizontal, or things like translate Y, which is vertical. Then we have to define the interactive class, which in Vue.js is the transition class, which is available for the whole transition period. And you can see here that at this point, we already have the working side drawer with a nice animation on when opening and closing it. And after this point, we just add some heading to it and some slots. Yeah, so pretty much the actual footage is like 11 minutes, and in 11 minutes we could build a working component, let's say a prototype, but a working component with transitions and some accessibility features, which I think is pretty good compared to the alternative approach where you'd have to spend way more time styling everything. Yeah, so these are ways you can find me on Twitter or GitHub or via email. Thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Cristi. This was great to see how fast you could create a component in 11 minutes. That's a lot faster than I ever created a component in my life.
Well, it was speed up, so.
No, but the whole
yeah,
thing
the actual timing, yes, was
yeah,
around.
exactly. It was 10 minutes. It was so fast. I have a curiosity question, and
Yeah.
it's because I have been talking, giving some courses for new developers, and usually people they always want to start with some sort of library or something that can make their way with CSS easier. You know, what is your opinion about that? Do you think that it's for junior developers to start building using this kind of libraries?
I think that you should always focus on the basics at the beginning. So regardless if it's CSS or JavaScript and so on, it's better to know the actual basics, like the CSS and JavaScript, how it works before jumping into a library. Otherwise, if you start directly with the library without knowing the CSS very well, I'm not sure if it will help very much. So, in my opinion, it makes sense to learn CSS the basic way and then use Tailwind to benefit from some of its neat little things.
Actual development time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.